All right, here we go. We've got a couple of days, actually a week or two of testing and using this battery pack here that we've made. And the conclusion is that it's not quite everything you want it to be. The biggest issue really comes down to the small leakage discharge that the supercapacitors put on the system. Did a bit of testing, and at high voltages, like between 15 and 14 volts, they can leak up to 35 milliamps. But when it comes down to the regular battery voltages, it can be, you know, as little as, say, 3 or 4 milliamps up to 10 milliamps, somewhere in that ballpark. And with that leakage, it means that in a few weeks, the system will essentially discharge itself to a point where the vehicle will no longer have the cranking power to turn on the vehicle. I haven't actually tested that, but just basic math and says that that's probably the most likely scenario. There's a couple different ways I'm thinking about in version 2 here to fix that. My first thought was to get a better round of capacitors that had a better internal leakage characteristics. The other thing I thought to do was just to buy another set of these and just replace the offending caps, because there's definitely, as I test these caps individually, there are some that are more offensive than others. And if we got rid of the ones that are the biggest offenders, we would make this pack better. The other thought, which seems to be probably cheaper and easier to do, is my newest thought, which is take a bunch of these guys. See if we got some focus here. What are we focusing on? Yeah, these guys, these little solar cells, and these are 5 volt, 60 or so milliamp solar cells. And if you put 3 of them in series, which I have done here, just solder them together, this gets us a 15 volt solar cell, very small, compact, and just put that up on the hood or the dashboard somewhere, and this could essentially fight the discharge of the solar cells, I think, rather well. And if you put something like this in line, in parallel with the whole system, this can fight the problem we're having, which is the self-discharge problem. The other slight problem I'm having, which I haven't quite determined if it's some of the wiring in the vehicle or internal to the capacitors resistance themselves, is that the voltage drop upon startup is definitely better than my old lead-acid battery, but still drops, you know, 2-3 volts, comes right back up when really cranking the motor on a cold day. I was hoping for a little better than that, but it's still an improvement. I think it's perfectly acceptable, so we're going to test that a little bit more in the future to see how bad and how cold and how bad the situation gets. I still suspect it's better than a standard lead-acid battery. Okay, well, I guess the thing to do now is to pull this apart and do a little bit upgrades. I need to package things a little better. This was a good test rig, but it needs some help. The other thing to do is I've done some more testing on the individual supercapacitors themselves, the banks at least of them, and I let them just I disconnected a set and let it sit there for a week, and it ran itself with no load on it altogether. It ran itself down to about 6.5 volts from 13.5, a little over 13.5. So not good. You could calculate what the loss is on that, but it's significant. The other thing to note is these lithium iron phosphate batteries seem to be holding up pretty well. The only trouble is with this 1/4 watt ohm resistor and the capacity of these cells. If I have the radio and all the lights and the headlights on and the vehicle off, I'm pulling about 17.5 amps. And that's a heavy load on these batteries, a very heavy load. So they tend to sag and dip pretty quickly with that kind of load. Now, that's not a normal working load for the vehicle. Matter of fact, my vehicle, being the Nissan Frontier, will automatically shut off its headlights no matter what you do if you leave them on while the vehicle is off after just a minute or so. So even the lead acid battery didn't you know, the manufacturer didn't think that was a good thing to do. So it's a pretty heavy drain on the system. But I can happily listen just to the radio with no lights on for a couple hours, no problem. I think that'll do well enough, at least for this test version. I'm going to attach the solar panels and see how we do. Okay, I've finished this up. This is these solar cells, 3 of them. I've put onto this piece of wood here, which I painted, and put some holes in it so I can mount it down to the truck. I've just mostly it's mostly just epoxy together, sort of fairly crude, but I think it'll work at least in the short term. And then I've also made a cable here for connecting it to the battery with a diode for reverse protection, and probably a little overkill with this water rated connector here, so I can connect and disconnect it if I need to. This should do the trick. Now again, these solar panels are cells. It's a panel now, but this is about 15.9 volts or something, and about 60 milliamps in full sunlight. Maybe a little better, actually. I haven't actually tested this in full sunlight yet. But it's supposed to be 60 milliamps, and this should be enough to reverse the slow discharge of the capacitors and the overall system, especially if the vehicle's parked in the sun. If it's not parked in the sun, even in the shade, with bad lighting or overcast, this panel still produces 4 or 5 milliamps of power, which seems to be about well enough to slow down the discharge of the capacitors too. So even if we're not parked in an ideal place, this still helps. So we're going to see how it does. I've been noticing that on each morning when I start up the truck, the capacitor, supercapacitor battery pack settles down to about 13.1 volts, and seems a little lower than I want. I'm hoping this will keep it up at like 13.6, which is where I think the lithium-ion phosphate batteries tend to want to stay at full charge. I guess we're just going to go ahead and install it now. Alright, what you see before you is the inside of my engine bay for my Nissan Frontier. This is the 2.5 liter engine, 4-cylinder, so it's not a huge engine. So bigger battery might be needed for a bigger engine. What I have here is I have the multimeter set up so you can see the voltage of the battery. You're going to be able to see the voltage of the battery as I turn over the engine here. I'm going to be inside the truck with the mic, so you're going to be hearing me the entire time. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go inside the truck now and start it. And you'll get to see it start the vehicle. Alright, put the clutch down, keys in, turn the car on, and here we go. As you can see, it starts up just fine. I've been running this way for a couple of weeks now. No real issue. So now what we're going to do is we're going to shut it off, and we are going to pull the fuse for the fuel pump. And then we're going to start the vehicle without fuel going to it. So it'll probably start up for a second or two and then die, because there's still going to be pressure left in the system. But then once it stops starting, we'll give it a couple of cranks and we'll see what the voltage does on the battery pack, and then we'll put the fuse back in and start it up. And so this is to get an idea of how bad, or how much cranking power we get if the engine didn't want to start right away, or it was super cold, or something along those lines. So back in the vehicle, pull the fuse out, and now I'm going to give it a go. There we go. Start it up. There it goes. It started. It should die. Yeah, there it goes. It died. So it couldn't. There's no pressure in the fuel line, so the vehicle starved. So now, with the vehicle starved of gas, we're going to start it again. Pretty good crank. Pretty good crank. We'll give it a second or two. And what's happening is that what you're probably seeing is that the voltage is climbing back up after each start, and that's the lithium iron phosphates starting the charging back up the capacitor bank. So it takes them a little while to recover voltage each time. So we'll give it another go. And we'll wait a minute here. Shut the vehicle completely off. And again, I can't see what the voltage is of the battery at the moment. I didn't plug in to the vehicle here. I forgot to take a meter with me inside, so I'm only guessing. But I'm going to go ahead and give it another go right now, and I bet it'll give it a good try again. Meh. All right. Not great, but now I'm going to get out of the vehicle and put the fuel pump fuse back in, and hopefully by the time I've done doing that, the voltage on the batteries, on the supercapacitors, will come back up so that we could, of course, start the vehicle again. There we go. The fuel pump fuse is back in, and I'm watching here the voltage climb on the supercapacitors here. And when they get up to about 12 volts, we're going to go back inside the vehicle and start the vehicle. All right, 11.5, close enough. As you can see, it just takes a short amount of time. You have to wait in between trying to start the vehicle before you can have another successful go at it. So here we go. Keys in the ignition, and turning the vehicle on, and now start. There you have it. Starts up all right, no problem. Yeah. All right, so 3,000 miles and three months later, this is what the supercapacitor battery pack looks like. Still in pretty good condition. There's some stuff on it and whatnot. The conformal coating I put on the circuit board seemed to work really well, and by conformal coating I mean girlfriend's old nail polish. Seems to have worked out fairly well. See if I can get this to focus. The things that we're going to do is we're going to put it into its proper enclosure now. I spent a whole bunch of time trying to print ASA on my 3D printer, and with the COVID-19 virus and camera problems, I've had a hard time putting this video together. So hopefully now it's time to just go ahead and do it. So we're going to put this into its final case, and I'm going to test the capacity of these lithium iron phosphates to see how they're doing after 3 months. make sure nothing's going on in there, and then I will give you my final reviews on what I think of this battery pack. Just as a precursor, or just sort of a spoiler, I like it. I'm going to continue to use it in my truck, although if I was to build it again, I would do it differently. Alright, now with that said, let's go ahead and take this apart and do some testing and build it in its final configuration. Alright, well, forgive it's a bit of a mess, but I am going to start the discharge test. There you can see the discharging, and I'm going to go ahead and start that right now. And we'll see how long that takes. Alright. Alright, so the capacity test is done, and you'll see that by the display is that it's 10.96 amp hours. So I had these both in parallel while I was testing them, so I should get about 12 amp hours if they're fully charged. I took these out of the truck and didn't charge them or anything. I just as they came out of the truck, directly put them on this discharger, do a discharge test. So that's the state they're in. Now it is quite normal for lithium iron phosphate batteries to test a little bit high when they're freshly brand new, and then after a few cycles to dip a little bit in their capacity and then stay consistent throughout the rest of their lives. And that's probably, we have some of that going on here. Also, this tester unit is new to me, and I'll have to run some more tests on it to see if it's truly accurate. I suspect it probably it's reasonably accurate. And I could do another full charge and discharge test of the batteries, but I think I will leave that for another day. I will just assume that we've got most of the capacity that we're going to get. I'm just going to assume that the capacity is okay. I think I'm going to go on to building this into the enclosure now, and giving you my final thoughts as of to date on this system. Alright, well, this is the box I bought. It should hold everything quite nicely. Focus. You can see we've got the two batteries here and here. They're sort of dark. Resistor, the capacitors are in this caddy still. These terminals will stick it out of the top here somewhere, and I think this will fit. Put a little bit of foam or some sort of insulation here to make sure things don't get jumbled about. It's about the size of the battery that was in the truck to begin with, so not too much difference in size. It'd been cool or better to have designed the box and 3D printed it myself, which is what I originally intended to do. But I just can't get a print this big to behave, especially in a material that is high enough temperature resistance that I'd want to put underneath the hood of the truck. Although I have some hot glue that I stuck in here all over the place to sort of hold it together, and none of the hot glue melted, so pretty good sign it doesn't get that hot in there, but of course we haven't had any hot days or super long trips. Anyways, so I think this is progressing nicely. It's going to fit in there and latch up and make a mess of the focus, but yeah, it's working good. Alright, I've got the box together. This is sort of what it's looking like. I show you the inside. It's pretty straightforward. This box isn't quite the right size, so I've had to add some foam and whatnot to take up a little bit of space, but it works pretty well. You can see there's the two batteries up top, and then if I can, let's see if I can tilt this. Oh, there you kind of can see it sort of in there. Yeah, the capacitors are in the caddy, and the resistor is still in the back. It's sort of bolted to the back. Now I'm going to take it all out and show you exactly how it is, because the wires are very tight to get everything in here, and it's not particularly fun, but that is it's together. Now I think this is going to work fairly well. It worked in the truck for 3 months with not really having any enclosure at all, just sort of hot glued and sklooged together. And that worked out fairly well. So I think we're gonna go with this. Okay, while the battery is charging, I'm gonna go over some of my thoughts on the current project. And one of the things I first want to talk about is that I never got around to installing an Arduino-based monitoring system. And the reason for that is fairly simple, is the monitoring system would draw 40 to 60 milliamps all the time while it was monitoring and data logging what was going on with the battery. And since my goal with this was to, let the car be able to sit for a long period of time and not discharge itself, the monitoring system itself would be the problem I was trying to avoid. It was going to discharge the battery, so it became less interesting to me to build it. I still might do it eventually, just because it might be interesting to see the data and see what's really going on. But I have 3 months of practical use now, and that's pretty much convinced me that it does definitely work. One of the other things I want to point out here is I installed a switch here. I thought it was a good idea, and this just disconnects the batteries from the supercapacitors, the lithium iron phosphates from the supercapacitors. And this is in case that if I ever run the battery completely flat, I can get a little boost charger, like a USB boost charger, and disconnect the lithium iron phosphate batteries from the supercapacitors, and then charge the supercapacitors up by themselves, which would be easy and quick to charge up, and I would get a shot at starting the vehicle. One day I did run into a day where my truck was hesitating to start. I've had a little bit of bad fuel or whatnot. I'm hoping that's the problem, and I had to really give it a crank, and I was unsuccessful on the first go to get it to start, but I waited 30 seconds and tried again, and it started right back up. So you don't get as long of a pull cranking as I would hope, but you do get multiple chances to start the vehicle. Probably, I don't know, if you're patient, maybe 100 or so. So it's not likely to leave you stranded. But because the I don't know if you saw on the bit earlier in this video where I show me cranking on it with the fuel pump disabled, you'll see how long you get. You only get I don't know, it's a few seconds of cranking before you have to pause, wait, and try again. So this doesn't really qualify or fall under the idea that I was thinking that this would beat a lead acid battery in cold weather conditions. It would if the supercapacitors were bigger and probably the lithium iron phosphates are bigger, but then it'd be a bigger package and it'd be more expensive, and that sort of defeats a little bit of the point of this battery. Although my main purpose of getting this battery, which is to get away from lead acid and to have a battery that should last way, way longer than lead acid, I think is accomplished. I don't see any reason why this battery won't last 10 or 15 years unless we have some sort of hardware failure or something like that, which, time will tell. I'm going to keep running this in my vehicle, so if I do have a spectacular failure of it, I will probably do a diagnostic video on finding out why that was at that time. The other thing, the other improvements, really the only other improvement that I might make to this at this particular stage, I might eventually at some point in time build a bigger one with better supercapacitors, because these ones still are the weak point. The supercapacitors really just fall short of their specifications, and they do put an extra trickle discharge on the whole system, and I don't really like that. I think it's still rather high. The only use case I had that was kind of unfortunate is that if I want to have my headlights on for a long period of time with the engine off, they will pull down this thing rather hard, and because the resistor in here doesn't allow enough current to pass out of the lithium iron phosphates fast enough as the headlights use it up, the voltage sags fairly rapidly. Not, you get a couple minutes, but you only really get a couple minutes of the headlights being on, and that's a little disappointing. But I can run my stereo. I just have a basic 50-watt stereo, standard stereo, and I can run that for a couple hours, and literally 2 hours, and not really be too worried about it. It starts fine. Let's see here. What else? Yeah, I think that more or less covers it. You'll see, of course, I did install a solar panel, and this is these extra wires coming up. It's attached a solar panel to the system to give it a little extra charge during the day while sitting. And well, I haven't actually let this vehicle sit since I've installed this this battery. It's been wintertime, it's been raining, it's been cold, and with all the crazy stuff with coronavirus or whatever going on, I've pretty much been exclusively using my truck, which is not normal. And so it's got a lot more miles and a lot more trips with it than I had, which is good to test the battery, because that's generally how most people are going to use it. A battery like this is a daily driver every day. But now, as we get into the warmer months, I'm going to transition probably away from using it every day, and it'll probably sit. And I'll see how it works under those conditions. That's pretty much it. If you have any comments or questions about this or improvements, go ahead and comment. I would like to hear about it, or maybe you found a better supplier of batteries or supercapacitors to try out. I might be willing to give this project another shot. The other, well, you know what? I think the only other thing to do is to put the proper documentation on the battery and call it done. And I think I got these stickers from Ave, and I think this is just very appropriate right here. I think that'll christen it done, and proper documentation in order. All right, thanks for watching, and see where we go from here. One of the questions I got in my previous video was about the capacity of the supercapacitors and the farads ratings, and the fact that the farad rating actually goes down when you put the capacitors in series. Now that is true. If you have two capacitors of the same size in farads and you put them in series, you've effectively halved the number of farads, but you've doubled the voltage. And that's just true with capacitors. It's not the same with batteries. You would get the same capacity in the battery, but then you would double the voltage if you were to put them in series. But that's not true with capacitors. If you have a question about why this is, I would suggest looking it up. It's unfortunate, but that's just sort of one of the cruxes of using supercapacitors. And I understand that it's not intuitive. And with that, we shall be done. Let's get the bubbles out, make it look official. Done. Thanks.